Mutually assured destruction for the Iranian regime is not deterrence, it's an incentive.
I want to start with trying to understand how exactly we got here.
Let's begin with this. This is a regime which is the world's largest state sponsor of terror. It is a regime that's deeply involved with the drug cartels in South America. It's the massacre of 500,000 Syrians, Iranian women in 2022. Those women were all massacred. A regime that has backed Hamas and Hezbollah. I'll give you a little scoop. Now, that was secret at the time. So we're up against the clock here. What impacts the clock? One is the other goal of the war.
We go back to the JCPOA. It's like, what deal is there to be done with people we know we can't trust?
The more serious people in the administration understood that you basically got to kick the can down the road. And that's what the JCPOA was. It was a kicking of the can down the road. But it was actually much more severe than that. President Trump says unconditional surrender. We're in a different ballgame. America can erase the trauma of Iraq, Afghanistan, and maybe even Vietnam, and send that unequivocal message that America is strong and don't mess with us.
Before you hear from Ambassador Michael Oren, I ask, if you want to support this show, all you have to do is press subscribe. If you do that, I can have more phenomenal guests like Michael Oren exploring the issues you want to hear about that the mainstream media won't touch. And if you head over to winstonmarshall.co.uk, not only will you get ad-free viewing, but you'll have an extended conversation between me and Michael Oren, where he describes his time as a student of the historian Bernard Lewis. But without further ado, Michael Oren. Ambassador Oren, thank you so much for taking time between red alerts, and I appreciate you have not slept much. When there aren't the alarm calls to get to the shelters, you have been doing a lot of media. I'm keen to speak to you about how we are in this situation. We're 6 days as we speak now into Operation Sitting Lion, where Netanyahu and the Israelis have launched an attack aiming primarily to deal with Iran's nuclear program. I want to start with trying to understand how exactly we got here. Now, I appreciate from a historical point of view, we could go back to 1979, but that I don't think we have the time to quite do that necessarily today. We could definitely go back to October 7th, 2023. But given your time as Israeli ambassador in America during Obama's terms, first time, I believe, perhaps we can start there and the JCPOA and how that came about. Now, I appreciate you were there before the JCPOA was signed, but you were there in the build-up to that. Now, I'm perhaps maybe you can tell me the story of how that came together and how from that JCPOA we get to where we are today.
Okay, it's a lot.
And I know that's
it's
a lot.
Delightful to be with you, Winston. Awake or sleep, it's great to be with you. And I always like a simple question to start off with. We can start at about 10,000 BCE and make our way up to the present. Okay, let's go back. We are dealing with a regime that has been in power for 46 years, since 1979. And we don't have to go back all the way to 1979, but we have to talk about the nature of the Iranian regime. And, when in negotiations with the United States and the international community, particularly the West, the negotiators on the Western side would always refer to Iran's nuclear program and then to Iran's malign behavior, which has to be one of the great euphemisms of all time. A malign behavior is a kid who comes into his room and destroys his toys. This is a regime which is the world's largest state sponsor of terror. It has sponsored and carried out terrorist attacks on multiple continents, killed thousands of people, everything from U.S. Marines in Beirut and diplomats in Beirut to Jewish communities in Argentina, to attempts to assassinate American leaders, attempts to assassinate me when I was ambassador. There was a failed assassination attempt in downtown Washington, together with the Saudi ambassador.
Wait, what happened?
They didn't succeed.
Well, clearly.
I'm sitting here. They didn't succeed. No, they were going to put a little bomb in our restaurant. They didn't succeed.
Wow.
It is a regime that's deeply involved with the drug cartels in South America. It's one of the ways they finance terrorism is by selling drugs, producing and selling drugs. A regime that has been complicit in the massacre of 500,000 Syrians during the Syrian civil war, a regime that has backed Hamas and Hezbollah in setting off the horrendous war we're experiencing still after 20 months that began on October 7th, 2023, a regime that has carried out dozens and dozens of attacks against American bases and warships in the Middle East and killed American service people, wounded hundreds of them, and a regime of all this. And by the way, this is a short list. A regime that is brutal toward its own people. have been successive attempts to overthrow the regime, to protest against the regime, most recently by Iranian women in 2022. Those women were all massacred. Some of them were thrown into prison and raped repeatedly every day. This is what we're dealing with, this regime which last year alone executed 900 of its own citizens for various charges like blasphemy. So we're dealing with a wicked, wicked regime. That's the malign behavior of the regime. And Iranian leaders, I would say not on a weekly basis, but close to a daily basis, pledge to destroy my country. They make a genocidal pledge pretty much every day. They're going to wipe this place off the map. And, along with denying the Holocaust, they actually had a festival every year for denying the Holocaust. They want to perpetrate another Holocaust. They're quite open about it. They don't dissemble it in any way. And so that's the malign behavior. So you want to say, okay, what happens when this country, this malign country, gets a hold of a nuclear weapon? What is it going to do? And you have to proceed on the assumption that, hey, they're going to use it. This is not like the Cold War. This isn't mutually assured destruction where one side has nuclear weapons, the other side have nuclear weapons, and they have a certain logic that prevents them from using it. I did my part of my education at Princeton, and my professor was this wonderful professor named Bernard Lewis, British.
Really?
Yeah,
I'm a huge fan. I've read several of his books.
Yeah, so he was my professor. And he used to always say to me, he said, Michael, he said that mutually assured destruction for the Iranian regime is not deterrence, it's an incentive. Like that line? I wish I had made up that line. Bernard Lewis, a blessed memory. So you have to proceed on the assumption. And not just that, once Iran gets nuclear military capabilities, we have zero ability to defend ourselves from terror. Good example, what Mr. Putin did in Ukraine. Remember, the first week after the invasion, February 2022, the Mr. Putin came out and said, well, if anybody tries to escalate against us in Ukraine, we're going to go on nuclear alert. And all of a sudden, all the West stopped giving serious offensive weapons to the Ukrainians because they're afraid. Now, what if Iran had a nuclear weapon? Even one. And every time Hezbollah and Hamas attacked us, they would go on nuclear alert. We wouldn't be able to defend ourselves, ever. So the question is not just whether Iran has a nuclear weapon. The question is whether it has the ability to have a nuclear weapon, whether it has threshold capacity. It's a matter of life and death for this country. Quite simple. Quite simple. There's actually, our margin for error on the Iranian issue is exactly zero. Exactly zero. So if you want, I can go back. I can go back to the time when I was ambassador. I was chosen by Benjamin Netanyahu. I wasn't a political person. I was an historian. Netanyahu was a big fan of history. And he understood that when Obama was elected, that America was having a different type of leadership and he needed someone who understood that new America. And I did, I think. But it was also when the issue of Iran came to a head. In 2007, together with my good friend and colleague, Yossi Klein-Halevi, we had written an article for the New Republic on the Iranian nuclear threat. This is 2007. So I've been involved in this issue for well over 20 years. And we said that this is going to be the big threat to the state of Israel. This is going to be an existential threat, and this would be the historic responsibility of any future Israeli leader to address this.
And what was the threat at that point? What were the capabilities? If let's say, 10, not quite 10 years, a few years later, the uranium enrichment was at 26%. Now we're talking about 60%. When you were writing then in 2007, what were the capabilities?
It was very low. It was very low. But Iran had started to build a facility at Natanz. And keep in mind, Netanyahu had been warning about the Iranian nuclear program since the 1990s. This is his first term in office. So he was not new to this. By the time I started writing this, he'd already been involved in it for 10 years. And then 2 years later, 2009, in my first months as ambassador, the facility at Fordow was exposed. It was secret. The Iranians were building it in secret under a mountain. You're not building a secret nuclear facility under a mountain to produce, peaceful nuclear energy. You're doing it for a reason, especially not this regime. And Iran, kept on saying that, of course, we're doing this just because we need peaceful nuclear energy. This is one of the biggest oil producers in the world who, actually don't need nuclear energy to have their generators going. And it was clear to us, and it was clear to the United States. For the next 5 years, I participated in the highest level discussions with the United States about the Iranian nuclear program. And it was very interesting, Winston, because we looked at the same information, the same intelligence. We had good intelligence. We knew how many centrifuges they had. They knew the rate of enrichment, what was their stockpile of enriched material. We knew where their ballistic missile system was, and we had a good idea where the warhead research was. We knew that in 2003, they had ceased working on a warhead publicly, openly, for fear that the United States would do to Iran what they had just done to Saddam Hussein in Iraq and invaded in 2003. The difference we had with the Americans was a philosophical difference. For we saw that the Iranians were building a bomb and that they would use that bomb at some point. And the Americans thought, and this is during the Obama years, thought that the Iranians just wanted to be treated with respect, and that if they were induced sufficiently, certainly financially, but not just financially, given respect, that they could become, as Obama said, and I'm quoting him, a responsible regional power. And that was a huge difference, a psychological difference, and philosophical difference. And the president, from his first week in office in January 2009, reached out to the supreme leader, to Ali Khamenei, and said, "Let's get involved in a discussion, open discussion." Now, that was secret at the time, but it came out eventually. And the United States, under the Obama administration, worked assiduously to achieve a nuclear agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in November 2013, a secret channel that had been operating on the island of Oman reached an agreement with the Iranians that, when we found about it, utterly shocked us. And when I think about it now, it still shocks me. In the very first meeting between Iranian representatives and American representatives, and we're talking about the future head of the CIA, Bill Burns, and the future National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, the United States recognized Iran's right to enrich uranium. Now, we have to understand what this means. There is no such thing as a right to enrich uranium.
Privately or officially?
This was a secret back channel. They recognized it in the first meeting.
What?
Yep. So, yeah, again, your response was basically like my response, and it was that first of all, there is no such thing as a right to enrich.
So that's quite drastically, if I may, different to how I'd understood it. So I saw I know we're a bit before the JCPOA getting signed in the history you're telling here, but I'd understood it that intelligence knew that enrichment programs were happening. I think this has been reported not only by the Associated Press, but Barak Ravid wrote a book documenting that the U.S. intelligence knew that. But it's actually worse than that. They were okay with it.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Wow.
So you understand that once you know that line, forgive me, you're British. Was it George Bernard Shaw? Now we're just haggling over the price.
Right.
Yeah. Right? We've already established who you are. We're just haggling over the price. Once you've recognized Iran's right to enrich, then the negotiation is just about, centrifuges and facilities. You've already given away the major thing in negotiations and got nothing in return, by the way, like zero. Certainly nothing in turn of the malign behavior that I talked about earlier.
This is in the Oman discussions, you mean?
Yes, this is in November 2013.
Okay.
And those dates are emblazoned on my soul. And from that point on, a huge rift opened up between the United States and Israel over the Iranian issue, where Netanyahu was threatening all the time to take unilateral military action. And that really came ahead during this period, during the fall of 2012, 2013. What's happening is the U.S. election. And Barack Obama is going up against Mitt Romney, a very, very tight race. And the conventional wisdom in Washington is that Israel will strike Iran in order to influence the outcome of the election against Obama, against the Democrats, in favor of the Republicans and Romney. And immense pressure was put on Israel, on yours truly. And within Israel itself, there was also opposition within the security establishment. The head of the Mossad, the head of the army, were acting unilaterally against Iran. So, and Netanyahu was really kind of caught in the middle. But for that entire summer of 2012 and into the fall of 2012-13, I would go to bed at night with a phone next to my ear, thinking I'd be woken up in the middle of the night, saying, "Okay, it's a go." Now, what happened was that Netanyahu went to the General Assembly of the UN and he drew a bomb. If you remember this.
Yes.
And the bomb had a red line across it. It had a bomb with a little fuse on it. And I could tell you the whole story about the bomb, but it's interesting.
Please do.
Well, I'll tell you the story. I would work on the prime minister's speeches, and he has a degree in architecture. He's a very good freeform drawer. He can draw, the guy. And he was trying to explain to us why enrichment and what level of enrichment would enable the Iranian regime to nuclearize, to actually have a nuclear bomb. It's called SQ, the amount of enriched material you need at 90% to create one bomb. And so Bibi drew on a piece of paper. He says, give me a piece of paper. And he took a sort of a magic marker, and he drew this bomb with a little fuse. And he drew a line, a red line. He says, give me a red one. And he drew a line, and that line was at 250 kilograms of uranium enriched to 20%. He says, think of your enriched uranium like the gunpowder you put in a bomb. And the fuse is much more complicated than the fuse you light, but that's pretty much what you got. That's the stuff that explodes. And once they pass that line, we'll have to act. So we among his advisors, we all said, well, why don't you use that drawing? It's a great drawing. Matter of fact, actually draw it while you're up there because you could do that. And he thought it was very funny. He says, then he drew up a picture of the Roadrunner, the cartoon. He could actually draw this. He says, well, they're going to say I did this. I'm like this with a bomb, And I said to him, no, Mr. Prime Minister, they're not going to call you Roadrunner. They're going to call you Yosemite Sam. Now, I don't know if that means anything to you as a young Briton, but that was a popular cartoon figure in the United States in the 60s and the 70s. Yosemite Sam, he had these bombs. In any case, he used the bomb. He didn't draw it. We had it sent out. Unfortunately, the bomb that came back came with a kind of a cartoonish little fuse on it with the sparkles.
Right.
But that basically signaled that Israel was not going to act militarily. And right after that, the prime minister had a conversation with Obama. I was there where he said, Mr. President, you asked for time and space to negotiate. I've just given you time and space to negotiate. So we backed down. In return for his generosity, his gesture, the White House later called Bibi, quote unquote, chicken shit. I hope I can say that on your podcast. Yeah, that was the way they said thank you to him.
If I just want to talk about the American perspective at that point, or specifically the Obama administration perspective at that point, how is it that they saw the Ayatollahs saying death to America since 1979,
right?
And they knew about the enrichment that was going on. Why is it that they had such a different, unrealistic approach towards Iran? And we saw this switch again. Trump switched more in line with the Israeli position, and Biden went back, which immediately preceded October 7th, 2023. But what is it that Obama, how could they have had such a different, was it just like a kind of a good faith assumption that all humans want prosperity and neighborliness and just to love their family? How could have Obama thought that?
It was multi-layered. Okay, let's see if I can unpack this quickly because it's a lot. One is simply war fatigue. America had been at that point involved in 2 unsuccessful wars in this region, in Afghanistan and Iraq. People wanted out. And last thing they wanted to do was get involved in another war in the Middle East. Even George Bush, when he was informed about the Syrian nuclear reactor in 2007, saying, I'm not going to get involved militarily. You guys can do what you want. Israel took out that nuclear reactor militarily. So that was one. 2, purely ideological. That the Iranians had a beef with the United States going back to the Mossadegh overthrow in 1953 by the CIA. That's typical sort of leftist liberal guilt about the third world and colonialism. That deep, and I'm not being facetious here. It is actually real.
Okay,
there's a certain democratic worldview that has a difficult time with the use of military power. A great belief in internationalism, international institutions, and engagement. Engagement is like a holy doctrine, as an end in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this notion that war is politics by other means it doesn't work with them. War is actually the failure of politics by all means. By all means,
right?
And it's a worldview. It's a very serious worldview. And
we'll come back to that worldview.
And I think that the more serious people in the administration understood that you basically got to kick the can down the road. And that's what the JCPOA was. It was a kicking of the can down the road, but it was actually much more severe than that. So those secret negotiations, 2013 by 2015, are open, and it results in the joint plan for cooperation, the great euphemism, the Iran nuclear deal. And Netanyahu comes to the Congress in March 2015 and gives a speech against it to both houses of Congress. He was invited by the Republicans behind the president's back. I was in government at that time. I was not. I was been elected to Knesset, not in Netanyahu's party, not in the Likud, and I was critical of his decision to give the speech in Congress. I thought the speech itself was excellent. I thought he could have given it in a different forum, like AIPAC. He did not. I thought it would cost us more votes among the Democratic Party than we gained, and in fact, it did. But okay. And the reasons that he set out in that speech were very compelling. And what were they? That the JCPOA basically capped Iran's ability to enrich for about 7 years until what was known as the sunset clauses kicked in. And since it didn't dismantle any part of the Iranian nuclear program, some parts were mothballed, but you just had to plug them back in. And since it did not prevent Iran from developing more rapid centrifuges that could enrich uranium at twice, 4, and ultimately 6 times the rate of the centrifuges of 2015, that means when these facilities came back online in 7, 8, 9 years, that Iran would be able to enrich uranium much, much faster. And even the uranium that had been shipped out to Russia under the JCPOA, they'd be able to replenish it in a matter of weeks, perhaps even days, which practically turned out to be true. And meanwhile, Iran would get sanctions relief and business deals that would have enriched it to the tens of billions of dollars, and Iran was going to use this money not to build schools and hospitals, but to finance Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, which is also true. Iran got legitimacy, and it got wealth. And, the thought of, John Kerry and other international foreign ministers up on the stage with the Iranian foreign minister and smiling while this thing was being signed with one of the most wicked regimes in modern history is also blazoned on my memory. It's one of the lowest moments in American and Western foreign policy, a low moment. And everything we predicted about the JCPOA turned out to be true. Everything. That Iran extended its hegemony across Syria, into Lebanon, into Yemen, across Iraq. That Iran was enriched. Iran developed IR2s, IR4s, IR6 centrifuges. It continued to add centrifuges. They capped it at 3.4% enrichment, but their ability, as was demonstrated, their ability to go from 3.4% to 60%, which is close to fissile material, was a matter of decision. They had all the wherewithal. There was nothing that stopped them physically from doing that. It was just a matter of decision. Now, there are many people today who will say that President Trump's decision to withdraw from the JCPOA in 2018 is the immediate backtrack to this war.
Yes, I wanted to ask whether
that's malarkey. And I'll tell you why it's malarkey. Is that because if he had not pulled out of the regime, out of that deal, and reimposed punishing sanctions, then Iran would have been further enriched, and the terrorists would have been further empowered. But also the sunset clauses would kick in. And after the sunset clauses kicked in, then Iran would be able legally to enrich uranium at an industrial rate and enrich enough uranium for hundreds of bombs. In addition, we also know that when our Mossad agents went and broke into the Iranian nuclear archive in Tehran, also in 2018, and came out with material that shows that they had been working on a warhead. That the warhead research hadn't stopped in 2003, that what they had done for fear of American intervention, they had broken up the research into various departments at Iranian universities. And we're going to put it together. So we're working on a warhead. The JCPOA did nothing, zero, to inhibit the development of ballistic missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles with warhead capabilities, and Iran developed that. So now Iran has missiles that can reach Central Europe, Britain, and within a decade will reach the eastern seaboard of the United States. And there was a half a page about warheads in the JCPOA, and nothing serious. There was no teeth in it. All right. So here we have an agreement that allowed Iran to basically maintain its nuclear program legitimately, to enrich itself legitimately, to develop missiles legitimately, more advanced centrifuges legitimately, and develop a warhead secretly. So there's a tremendous danger here. It can't emphasize this enough for the state of Israel, along with that quote-unquote malign behavior, because you just cannot separate them. This is not a peaceful or peace-loving regime developing nuclear energy. This is a jihadist regime that aims to conquer the Middle East and then use that conquest as a springboard for global conquest. And they make no mistake, they make no attempt to dissemble that.
Is it at all relevant that the JCPOA, after Trump withdrew, it's still Iran didn't withdraw, and there were other nations, including the UK and EU,
Right.
Signed it. What's the relevance of that pact with those other nations?
Well, the fact that the United States withdrew did not give the Iran the right to violate it. It was still signed on this agreement with other countries. And the violations, the significant violations of the JCPOA by Iran did not start under Trump. They started the day that Joe Biden was elected president, because Biden had run on a platform of renewing America's membership in the JCPOA. And the Iranians understood that they had an eager president, so they could rank it up. I wrote an article some years ago for the American press. I think it was in Time magazine. I got a little flack for it. We talked about Bernard Lewis earlier. He was always accused by the other side of being an Orientalist. I got branded an Orientalist for this article. And what did I write? I said the article was called "How Not to Buy a Middle Eastern Carpet." Now, I don't know if you've ever gone carpet shopping in Istanbul or in Cairo. And there are some basic rules about carpet shopping. One is when you walk into the store, the owner of the carpet salesman is always going to ask you how much do you want to spend. What were you thinking of spending? You never answer that question, because the minute you say that, that becomes the bottom line. That becomes the bottom line. And you have to begin to walk away. You have to walk away. And if the carpet salesman runs after you, then maybe you got a deal. So what happened in the JCPOA and subsequent negotiations with Iran, and it happened with Biden again, was the Iranians asked, "What's the bottom line? How much you want to spend?" Well, what we want to spend is to recognize your right to enrich, and to have a certain number of centrifuges and have a certain number of facilities. So once you've established that, that's the bottom line. Everything else Iran gets. And in these negotiations, the Iranians kept on running away. The carpet salesman kept on running away, and the customer kept on running after them.
Yes.
And so what do you expect? The price is going to go up and up and up and up, and which is precisely what happened under the Biden administration. Everyone running after the Iranians. Now, Trump began to fall into that too, and beginning, because
in the second term.
And
with Witkoff.
It appeared to be that the United States was running after Iran. And it's interesting what happened. Iran began to increase its enrichment by 30%. It increased its stockpile by 30%.
Since January this year?
Yes. All right. Because they understood that the customer was running after the carpet salesman. And it was a mistake, because you don't do this with Donald Trump, alas. He is a businessman.
Okay.
And something that Trump and that Obama and Biden were not. And
we've glossed past a rather large footnote. I know.
How did I do on that? That was like 46 years, not bad.
But under Biden was the unfreezing of assets, and crucial then is that was that Hamas were able to have this is $6 billion in South Korea that was unfrozen.
That was by Biden.
Sorry, Biden. Yes,
Biden. But even before that, with the JCPOA, Hezbollah got $1 billion out of the deal.
Did they really?
Yeah.
Wow. So it is now that the Witkoff, we're in Oman. There's negotiations that as we describe here, and meanwhile Iran are enriching themselves. Do the Americans understand this? And the way I'm thinking about this is, Trump sort of seems to be playing a good cop, bad cop with Netanyahu at the moment, or maybe until a week ago, let's say. When the Americans are doing this deal with Steve Witkoff, there's negotiations with the Iranians in Oman, do they know what's going on in Iran with the enrichment? Is it just a ploy to get themselves ready, get the Israelis ready? Clearly, America knew about what Israel had planned. How far in advance? It's not clear, but they definitely knew in advance. Do you think? What do you think's going through Trump's head in the 60-day negotiations?
I go on Israeli media pretty much every hour, and the first question I'm asked all the time is, what's going through Donald Trump's head?
Right.
And I'm a little facetious about it. Well, he just called 15 minutes ago, and he says, "Michael, let me tell you what's going on in my head." Okay? People closest around him don't know what's going on in his head, and it's always the most elusive question. I think that now we're gonna exit the realm of what I know and get deep into speculations. My speculation, to the degree that I've worked with the first Trump White House on various issues, and have worked with people around him. But I'm not in his head. But this is the best I can do. That is, he's actually not of one mind, but of several. One of those minds is I'm a peacemaker. I'm a deal maker. I hate wars. I end wars. I'm going to end the Russia-Ukraine war in 24 hours. Remember that one? I'm not going to get involved in an endless war with the Houthis. I'm going to cut bait, all right, and get out of there. That's me. And I made a promise to my voters, my constituents. He said, America first, no more endless wars, certainly not in the Middle East. There are the J.D. Vance faction in the White House that says America first, but if we have to invest militarily in an area, let's do it with China, and let's keep our eyes on the ball. China is the ball. Iran's not the ball. Then there were the Iran hawks in his administration. Mike Waltz, who apparently lost his job because of it. He was the national security advisor, and he was moved to the UN. Again, this is press scuttlebutt, but that he was too much in discussions with Israelis about kinetic action against Iran. And Marco Rubio, and I'd worked with Marco Rubio before, and I know that he is a staunchly pro-Israel, steadfastly anti-Iran. So the White House is going different directions, and I think Donald Trump is going different directions. And there's a lot can be said about his relationship with Bibi, on and off, gone and go. I think at the end of the day, there are two very alpha leaders in one room, and that's always going to be a source of frisson, if not friction. But when they are in lockstep, that's very powerful. So it's extremely fluid and dynamic situation.
Yes.
And you say maybe for the last week, Netanyahu and Trump have sort of they've been in coordination, but it's not. It's almost every day there's remarks coming from out of the White House that are seemingly contradiction. That just this week the president said, well, in this discussion with Putin that the war has to end, there has to be negotiations again. I'm willing to negotiate with Iran. To yesterday, unconditional surrender.
Yes.
And we are controlling the skies of Iran. That's a big one. We, i.e., Israel and the United States. Last night he was taking credit for it. So it is a moving target, or as they say in America, a moving goalpost.
How much is it a we? When Trump says we are in charge, how much are the Americans?
Well, factually it's true, because our planes probably could not fly without American jet fuel and could not bomb without American bombs. And they are American-made planes that are purchased with American aid. Okay, so there's a lot to be said for that. I'll give you a little scoop. I'm going to write about it, I think, this week for the Israeli press. During my time as ambassador, and then later during my time as a member of Knesset, I tried to convince first the Obama administration, later the Trump administration, to sell, lend, or lease Israel B-52 bombers. Or at the very least, let our crews train on them. And I did not succeed.
And so the relevance of that now
is very relevant.
Right, because to get those uranium enrichment plants, you need the B-52s.
Maybe not. I don't know. To get them quickly, okay, you need the B-52s. I think Israel can do it, maybe not quickly.
Can Israel, I mean, we're going into the sort of military capabilities at this point, but can Israel, do they need America? And can they do this without them? Is there any circumstance where they can fulfill those military obligations without American assistance?
I think logistically, in terms of certainly the resupply of munitions, very, very difficult. There are several items in the Israeli press today that were running low on interceptors. And keep in mind, there's a world shortage of munitions because of Ukraine.
Right.
The Ukrainian army itself far exceeds the America's arms industry to keep up. And so here we have another major war going on. So that is a big challenge. What we don't have with the Obama administration that we have with the Biden administration was this constant scrutiny about the use of these munitions. Constant. There was a department especially set up in the State Department to monitor our use of American munitions. There's never been anything like it during the Gaza and Lebanon stages of this war. We don't have this. That department doesn't exist anymore. We don't have that scrutiny. And they're willing, the United States, so far, the best I know is willing to give us everything we've asked for, everything we need, to the degree the United States can actually supply it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And there are limits to America's stores as well. And they have red lines themselves. They have to, when J.D. Vance says we have to keep our eye on the ball on China, and we have to have a certain number of munitions to protect ourselves or Taiwan against China, he's making a compelling argument. We have to take that into consideration.
Yeah. Can you give me a military sort of overview of the operation? What exactly we're dealing with? I've heard you speak before that you follow this stuff very closely. And before we started shooting, we were talking about the ballistic missiles that have been launched from Iran here to Israel whilst we've been here in Tel Aviv. I wondered if you could give an overview of the capabilities and what's going on exactly.
Let's begin with this. This is a war of attrition. And forgive me, I'm going to use some Americanisms here. One is that both sides want to see which one will be the first to cry uncle. I used that term with the BBC the other day, and I had no idea what I was talking about.
I don't. Sorry.
Why?
It's
because you have been cut off from the true use of the English language for 400 years. What is the equivalent to this when a wrestler's down on the ground and he's pinned? He cries uncle.
Right.
Which means I give up.
Okay.
And they're going to see which side says I give up first. Which guy cries uncle? And the uncle they go to is Uncle Sam. Because at the end of the day, we're going to be back in the negotiating table. And the question is, which side comes back to the negotiating table with the stronger hand? Because the one who cries uncle first is going to have the weaker hand. And that was the case up till yesterday from the Americans, because that's the case when President Trump says unconditional surrender, we're in a different ballgame then. Okay. Now we're not in the Gulf War, we're in World War II. I have more to say about that later. As a historian, there are lots of echoes here in World War II. And that term has not been used by an American president since Roosevelt met Churchill in Casablanca in 1943. That was when the Allies decided on unconditional surrender of the Axis. There we go. There's a date. Has not been used for 80 years.
Wow.
82 years.
Okay.
Isn't that amazing? Interesting.
Yeah.
And we can talk about that further. So let's begin. The war of attrition. On our side, we have the Israeli Air Force. And we have Mossad agents on the ground who apparently, in the most extraordinary, remarkable achievement ever, probably even more than the beeper and walkie-talkie operation in Lebanon, actually established a base in Iran for launching explosive drones. My God. Okay. And immense penetration, very deep penetration by Israeli intelligence of Iran. And I would also assume that we're working in conjunction with oppositional elements there. We know where all their generals are. We know where the head of the intelligence are. We were able to pick them off in their apartments and not harm their neighbors. It's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah.
And basically shaving off their leadership cadres. That's what we have on our side. We also have anti-missile defense, the most advanced, multifaceted anti-missile defense in the world. We have 3 levels, 4. Arrow 3, which is an orbital anti-missile defense, because a lot of these rockets fired by Iran go into outer space and they come back through the atmosphere. And the Arrow 3 can hit them there. It's a U.S.-Israel invention. Arrow 2 is suborbital.
Okay. What does orbital mean?
That means it goes out into space and comes back in.
Okay.
And it also shortens you can think of it, shortens the time it takes from launch to impact.
Right.
Into space, the Earth is moving, and it can land in a matter of minutes as opposed to many minutes. Suborbital doesn't go out of the atmosphere, and we can hit it there with Arrow 2. If it's a medium-range cruise missile, we have another American Israel system called David Sling.
Yes.
That can take them out. And if it comes down very low, we have Iron Dome.
So Iron Dome's not really been relevant to this week.
That's more like the Iron Dome
rockets.
Is for short-range standoff rockets, rockets that go up and down. They're not cruise missiles.
Yes.
And mortar shells.
Yes.
So it's very different.
That's what we've been seeing from Gaza and from Lebanon.
Gaza and Lebanon.
Okay.
That's Iron Dome.
Yeah.
And now also we have Iron Beam, which is the first laser weapon, seriously labored weapon in the world.
Has that been used?
It has been used to take out hundreds of drones.
Okay.
And it's probably being used now to take on drones. They're firing drones at us every day. The Iranians don't have an air force. They have planes from 1979. When Israel attacked 6 days ago, all these planes took off and fled. A couple of them were shot down. Probably the first dogfight since, I don't know when, probably the Gulf of Sidra incident in the 1980s, okay? Top Gun. That's the flight. The planes that they fly are the planes that Tom Cruise flew in the first Top Gun. That's how old they are.
Wow.
Believe me, they're probably in much worse shape than Tom Cruise is because he looks 18. And the missiles being fired at us by the Iranians are called the Khaybar missiles. It's a genocidal name because in the early years of Islam, when Muhammad was beginning to spread his message, the Jews of the Arabian Peninsula didn't accept it, and they lived in an oasis of Khaybar. And so Muhammad led his army and massacred them all to the last woman and child. So Khaybar is a euphemism, if you will, a metonym for eliminating the Jewish people. And Arabs occasionally or Muslims will go around, even demonstrations around the world, and go Khaybar, Khaybar. That means kill us.
Mm.
And they don't have large tank formations. They've invested everything in missiles. Now we thought they had 2,000 of them, and these are very big missiles. They're not small. They're the length of a city bus, if not more. And they pack 200 pounds of TNT. Now, if you can remember the Second Intifada, all those bus bombings, those buses that were unraveled by bombs, that was about 5 pounds of TNT, between 5 and 15 pounds. You can imagine what 200 pounds do.
Yes.
And you can see the result on some of the buildings that have been hit here. Very, very powerful.
Yes.
If they get through. And there's no anti-missile system that is foolproof. All these systems that I mentioned to you are altogether about 92% effective. So if they're firing 100 rockets at you, 8 are going to get through.
Uh-huh.
And that's precisely what happened. Between 7 and 8 get through out of every 100. Then we have assistance. We have assistance from Jordan, who they say they'll take down rockets not to protect us, but because the rockets are violating their airspace. Okay. We have the United States, the British, a bit of the French. And the Americans have 3 systems. They have the THAAD system, the Aegis system, and the Patriot system, which all go off at the same time. But even with that, there's some going to get through.
So the Americans are using those systems here?
Yes.
And they're operating them from where?
From the Persian Gulf. And they have ships.
Okay.
And they also use their planes. They use the planes off the aircraft carrier because at a certain time, a plane can actually shoot down a rocket. Certainly can shoot down a drone.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen American pilots interviewed about shooting down drones.
Okay.
Drones are not going that fast.
And just to clarify, the Americans have been doing this since
Yes, I do
Thursday.
not know the degree. I know the degree they did it in the previous 2 times the Iranians fired at us in October and April of 2024.
Okay.
So that's the balance of power, balance of terror, however when you talk it. It's our Air Force and ground forces versus their missiles.
Okay.
Now, in a war of attrition, both sides have the ability to ratchet up the threat. And the idea is we're trying to get them to say uncle, and they're trying to get us to say uncle without taking out our biggest threats. So Israel could ratchet up. We have submarines. We have ballistic capabilities we haven't used, and we have cyber capabilities we have not used. Now, you remember that a couple of years ago, all the gas stations in Iran stopped working. Actually happened twice. Who did that? Not us. All right? Somebody did that. We have the ability to shut off electricity, probably the water in Iran. I don't think we want to do it because we want to make the distinction between the battle against the regime and the battle against the people. We don't want to hurt the people. We could ratchet up. The Iranians say they're going to ratchet up too, that they have more powerful rockets in their arsenal.
Which they might?
They might. So far, empirically, right? They've gone from firing 300 rockets at a pop in 2024 to firing 200 on the first night of this war, 100 the next night, 60 the next night, 40 the next night, and now we're down to 10.
Yeah, last night. I had 15 last night, but yeah,
whatever.
sure.
And Israel claims that we've knocked out about half of their missile capabilities, which is launchers and arsenals.
That's not half of the 2,000.
No, that's the. So then our national security advisor, Nesmi, came out yesterday and said, well, it's more than 2,000. We made a mistake. So we don't know what we're dealing with. We don't know. But again, it's a war of attrition. So yes, our planes are bombing pretty much at will. There's no more air defenses or very minimal air defenses in Iran. But they are keeping our airport closed. They are keeping our lives paralyzed, our economy moribund. putting tremendous stress on us, and it builds up. And you're also dealing with a society here that has already endured 20 months of very complex, agonizing war.
Yes.
And debilitating war, exhausted. So, and the Iranians know this.
Yes.
So the question of, who cries uncle, who goes to the Americans first and say we're willing to negotiate, is still an open question, though less so. Because if Israel knocks out their Iranians' missile capabilities, then our ability to get them to cry uncle first is much greater. Much greater.
It's specifically their missile launchers, right? What I've heard is that it's not just targeting the missile silos and the weaponry, but if the launchers are knocked out, then they can't do anything with them.
That's logical.
Anyway.
If you don't have you can have bullets on a table, but if you don't have a gun,
sure, exactly,
you're not going to do much. You can throw the bullet to somebody, but
yes.
it's not going to hurt them very much.
So we don't know whether there's a. It would seem like Occam's razor that they're just depleting, and they actually haven't got any huge.
Or they're fooling us. I don't know. I'm going to go with what the Israeli army is saying, that they are succeeding. The reason the number of rockets has gone down is because they don't have that many.
Right.
But still, all you need is one rocket to keep the airport closed.
Yes.
You don't need that many rockets. You only need 10, 15 rockets to keep us in a moribund state.
Yes.
So, we have to completely eliminate the rocket firing ability. So we're up against the clock here. What impacts the clock? One is the other goal of the war, which is not getting Iran to dismantle nuclear facilities that are already partially dismantled, but regime change, which in the wake of the Iraq War certainly got a bad name in America and the West. But Netanyahu, not for the first time the other day, called on the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow their government. Trump has now said it wouldn't be bad if this Iranian government would go. He's threatening the supreme leader. Great line. He says to the supreme leader, "We know you are.
Yes.
We can get to you, and we won't. But don't you dare touch a hair on any American soldier's head," kind of thing.
Yes.
It's kind of like saying, nice house you got here.
Yes.
Same thing if something would happen to it. Great line.
The regime change argument has been interesting because it's not been explicit that that's the primary.
It has been, though. With
Netanyahu,
it called on people to rise up. Yeah, sure.
It's not clear to me what those options are, though, for the new regime. Who that would be? There's the or the son of the fallen Shah in
Reza,
who's in Los Angeles, I believe, or in America. Certainly.
He's in Long Island.
Long Island, right? I'm not actually. Is there any evidence of his popularity in Iran? And
I don't know.
And so aside from him, it's not clear. The Ayatollahs have done such a good job of squashing any resistance that it's not clear to me who's going to fill the vacuum exactly.
Maybe someone has a better idea. I don't. My working assumption through years was if there was going to be an overthrow of this government, it would come from the army, because the army hates the RGC. And the army traditionally had a close relationship with Israel, going back in the 60s and the 70s.
Is this the Quds Force? Or is this...
No, Quds Force is terrorists.
Okay.
They're terrorists. And then there's another group called the Besiege, or a group of thugs. And people who are truly Iranian experts believe that Israel should be striking Besiege headquarters in the provinces. Because in the provinces, there are a tremendous amount of ethnic minorities, Arabs, Balujis, different Azeris who hate the Iranian regime, and that they're kept down by the Besiege, who are a bunch of guys with baseball bats that kill you.
Right.
And
you
it's
can't
interesting.
You can't be expecting a minority to fill the void of leadership, or maybe I misunderstand.
No, but to overthrow the regime and take it down. So as of last night, there were leaflets being distributed in Tehran calling for the overthrow of the regime. There were car bombs that went off this week, 5 car bombs in Tehran that we didn't do, Israel didn't do.
Do we know who is distributing? We don't know. Oppositions there. Okay.
People hate these, quite rightly, they hate this regime. And it's going to have a base that's very loyal, but not everybody. And, right now with the supreme leader hiding somewhere in the mountains, apparently not too effectively, layers of his leadership being eliminated, 3 heads of intelligence in 4 days, 2 chiefs of staffs, people he's known since the revolution, 1979, not easy. And for the first time since the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, Tehran experiencing war. We have experienced war here from Iran in Tel Aviv, for decades now.
Mm-hmm.
Iran has not had one bullet fired at it, not one. Not by us, not by the United States, not by anybody. Now they're knowing what it's like. And they don't like it. They're fleeing from the city by the hundreds of thousands.
Yes.
And that's putting tremendous pressure on the regime, too. I would caution against overenthusiasm. It is still a regime that has very deep roots and great and oppressive powers. We always tend to underestimate their longevity.
And 20% popularity is what I've seen. Maybe that was before this specific conflict
I had always
started.
heard 60%.
60% popularity.
I tell you what, that someone said that they will always. This is before this war. That the Iranian regime will always ensure that they have a slight majority. Whatever it takes, patronage.
I mean, if there's
payoffs,
60%,
whatever.
they're one of the most popular leaders in any nation in the world if it's that high.
That's what they were striving for. Now I don't know if it's true. Again, I'm not an Iran expert. I'm a great expert on the Iranian nuclear program, but not on Iranian society and culture. And I don't pretend to be.
So when it comes to regime change, then, and Israel and America not going to take out the Ayatollah completely, what's the golden bridge for him back? I mean, he spent his entire career, and his predecessor, Khomeini, the same, saying death to America, death to Israel. What is the circumstance in which he says? Because I've also seen some people saying the chance of actual regime change is pretty low. Some are saying as low as 5%, but maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe they're wrong. But if he was to stay and that he's not being taken out, how could he save face exactly? Because he was going to say love to the Zionists now, or love to America. I was wrong. How exactly is his path out of this?
Well, from the American standpoint, here we go back to World War II. Forgive me. At the end of in August 1945, when after the dropping of the atomic bombs, Japan was going to surrender, and there's a big question: what was to do with the Emperor Hirohito, who had basically bore responsibility for this, for everything from Pearl Harbor onward, and Roosevelt decided to keep him, right, and say, well, let's get Hirohito to say I was wrong, and tell him to call on the Japanese people to surrender quietly and be. The first American soldiers who set foot in Japan in September 1945 didn't know what they were going to receive, but they received like honored guests because Hirohito told the Japanese people to do that. Well, maybe that's the thinking about Khomeini also, that he's worth more to the Americans alive than he is dead, because he can give it an imprimatur of legitimacy to the surrender. How does that work on the Iranian side? Here's how it goes. It's theological. In Shiite Islam, there's a notion of taqiyya. Have you ever heard this word?
Yes.
So taqiyya is very interesting. It doesn't have any translation into English. What it means is that you can put on any face and say whatever you can say in order to preserve the faith.
Yes.
And if Khomeini would come out and say, we made a mistake, we don't want this, America's not the great Satan, we don't need this nuclear program, it will be with a wink and a nod of taqiyya. Of
course.
And they'll understand.
They're Islamists.
And they'll understand that, and people understand that.
Yeah.
And it is a crucial term to know. It's a word to know. Yeah.
It's crucial, but again, we go back to the JCPOA. It's like, what deal is there to be done with people we know we can't trust? So, from the point of view of Israel and America and other allies on this side of it, if we know about Taqiyya, we know that these guys are Islamists, why exactly should we expect any sort of agreement?
You can't. And the only way you can do it is by verification, but very, very intense verification. Very intense. And
verification of their nuclear proliferation.
Everything. Listen, we are knocking out basically their ability to enrich uranium in the future. They have 408 kilograms of enriched uranium to 60% that they have hidden somewhere. They may have hidden it in multiple sites. And unless that material is taken out of Iran and shipped somewhere else, perhaps to the United States, then they're always going to have ability to use that material to make a bomb. And the only way, I think, and I don't know if there's a military means of eliminating that stockpile or neutralizing it, the only way to do it is through negotiation. And that's where, Uncle Sam comes in again. So in the last 24 hours, I've written extensively, talked extensively about the position at the negotiating table. And I think it's not too early to talk about the negotiations the day after the war. And here I'll go back to what I began with earlier, Winston, about malign behavior that no one wants to talk about, which I think is a cardinal mistake in the United States, the West dealings with Iran. It's like saying to Nazi Germany, I don't like comparisons with Nazi Germany, even as an historian. It's like saying, okay, we're going to take away your airplanes, but we're not going to take away your tanks, or we're not going to take away Nazism. Okay, right? You can be Nazis, okay. You can oppress your people, you can kill Jews, but just don't have an air force.
Yeah.
For the time being, by the way. You can have an air force in 10 years. This is basically the JCPOA.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I don't like comparisons with Nazis, but okay. I said it. Kill me. We have to talk about the malign behavior. That at that negotiating table, whether it's a different regime or this regime that comes to the table on its hands and knees, it has to be not just about dismantling the nuclear program and intense verification. It has to be about ending Iran's support for terror. No more Hezbollah. No more Hamas. No more October 7th. No more trying to assassinate President Trump or anybody else. No more blowing up Jewish community centers in South America. No more. No more. No more taking over Syria. No more taking over Lebanon.
Yeah.
No more Houthis. How about this? And here's an opportunity that we're never going to get this opportunity again. I don't know. I can't imagine we'll get this opportunity again.
Yes. No.
And it's very important we talk about this now. And I have said, and I say this unabashedly, that President Trump is said to want a Nobel Peace Prize. He can get a whole shelf load of those peace prizes. He can get one for Israel's peace with Lebanon, Israel's peace with Syria, Israel's peace with Saudi Arabia, maybe something with the Palestinian issue, Gaza, maybe even Israel's peace with Iran. Can you imagine that one? So everything could change here. We are, and again, to be a historian at this moment is a remarkable experience because you're actually living through an historic inflection point.
It's a civilizational level.
Everything can change. Or as my taxi driver said today, we're not living through historical times, we're living through biblical times. And I said, I'm going to quote you on that.
Yeah, I think he's right.
Great.
I think wrapping a couple of these things together, you said earlier, this is the Gulf War, not World War II.
Right.
And I just want you to unpack that for me so I've understood that. And especially keeping in mind, and we've touched on this earlier, but the sort of America first, they might hear you say a statement like that and be like, and a lot of them are waking up and saying, oh my goodness, is this 2003 all over again? The sort of one of the faction who voted for Trump who were against the forever wars. And so they weren't happy. They don't want the Gulf War all over again. I was wondering if you could just expand on that and so I can understand exactly what you meant.
Well, many of the people who are of that school, who subscribe to the American First school, say that the alternative to diplomacy is war. But it's a false dichotomy. And it always was a false dichotomy because Iran has zero ability to make war against the United States. And their point of reference is the Iraq War or Afghanistan War, where 500,000 American troops went into Iraq. That's not going to happen here. No one's talking about American ground forces going in. And if they did go, Iran would have no ability to stop them. It's very, very different. You're talking about a couple of hours, maybe days at most, of aerial bombing. I don't know whether we need it or not, but that's what we're talking about. And the benefit of that is that you prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. Now, America faces 4 adversaries in the world: Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. 3 of them have nuclear weapons. Do you really want a 4th to have it? And of that 4th one, do you want them to be a theocracy that wants to dominate the Middle East and the world? Really? And as the world's largest sponsor of terror, you want your terrorists to have nuclear abilities too? You have to ask these questions. And if you care about China and you care about Russia, by standing strong against Iran, you'll be sending an unequivocal message of American steadfastness to your adversaries. Because, and this is one of the big problems I've had with dealing with Americans of both parties for a long time, they believe that the world is compartmentalized and they don't see a global stage. So they believe you can pull out of Afghanistan and Mr. Putin won't derive conclusions from that, right? Or the Chinese won't derive conclusions about Taiwan. They don't understand that. When you anywhere you cut and run, it's going to send a message of weakness, and powers will take advantage of that. And geopolitics, like nature, hates a vacuum. It will fill up. It usually fill up with bad actors. So here's an opportunity. Here's an opportunity. You could flip their argument. There's an opportunity with with almost no danger, because Iran has nothing that can hit a B-52 flying at 50,000 feet. No danger. America can erase the trauma of Iraq, Afghanistan, and maybe even Vietnam, and send that unequivocal message that America is strong and don't mess with us to America's adversaries. That's the flip side of the American first argument.
Yeah, okay.
And or as President Trump tweeted in response to Tucker Carlson the other night, don't tell me what America first means.
Yeah.
Iran having a bomb is not putting America first.
Yes.
And guess what? He's right. He's actually right.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's helpful. Thank you. I appreciate you're a busy man and you have much more media to get to. I had many more questions, but I suspect I'd be opening up cans of worms.
Well, I love cans of worms.
Can I give you a last can of worm then?
Please then.
It's
worm away.
It's regards to the British.
Yes.
So we've mentioned a couple of times Iranian missiles in 2024, both in April and in November, up to 700 missiles. At that point, the British were involved. The British Royal Air Force were involved in helping Israel. And before this, in fact, just after Rising Lion was announced, the Times of London announced that the British were not informed because the current government is deemed unreliable.
Yes.
I want to understand what happened between April
Different government
2024. Right.
Different government for starters. So I ruffled a few feathers, I guess, about a week and a day ago. It seems like an eon ago on the BBC when I was asked to respond to the British government's decision to sanction 2 Israeli ministers, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. And the reporter asked me, and I said, listen, I don't represent the Israeli government. I find many of these ministers' positions repugnant. I will not defend them. But I'll tell you that the British decision is anti-democratic, anti-Semitic, and anti-British.
Wow.
That got them. Shall I unpack that?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, it's anti-democratic because, first of all, there are no shortage of autocratic countries in the world, authoritarian countries in the world that you can sanction. And the list of democratic countries in the world are actually getting shorter, and Israel is on the ultimate short list of countries that have never known a second of non-democratic governance. We're only the only country on that list has never known a second of peace. And whether you like these ministers or not, the fact of the matter is they were elected. And what you are doing is basically sanctioning Israel's democracy. So it's anti-democratic. And someday this is going to come back to bite you. Because someday there's going to be a British person who has been elected to government, to parliament, to government, who other countries don't like, and they're going to sanction you. And you're going to see how you like that. That's the precedent you have created. It's a blow to democracy. 2, anti-Semitic. Why anti-Semitic? That was the one that got them. Why is it anti-Semitic? Anti-Semitic, get this. The definition of anti-Semitism is singling Israel out, singling Jews out for special treatment that you don't give to other people. I don't see the British government sanctioning Qatar for its support of Hamas. I don't see the British government sanctioning Turkey for its support of Hamas. I don't see the British government sanctioning China for putting 1 million Muslims in concentration camps. You guys are a bunch of cowards, and you're anti-Semitic cowards. You're singling Israel out. Because you can. Great. Britain. Great.
Yeah.
Okay? And thirdly, you're anti-British. Because we're fighting against the same enemies that hate you. We're fighting against, you may not like the way we're fighting them, and I have reservations about the way we're fighting them. At the end of the day, these people want to destroy you as much as they want to destroy us, and you're helping them. Anti-democratic, anti-Semitic, and anti-British. And didn't often happen to me on BBC. They had nothing to come back with.
So, I mean, I just want to point out...
How about that one?
If I can point out to listeners that our current government were... they only had 20% of the electorate when they came to power. So you're not referring to the whole British people, just the government. Because
Please.
I don't think you're
actually didn't say
wrong.
that line about Great Britain, but I really felt it was a cowardly act.
Yes, well, the viewers of this show are no fans of the British government, so you don't have to worry. There'll be music to their ears that you say that. But so I'm clear, it's actually because of the British government's virtue signalling about Israel when they don't talk about other atrocities around the world. They just focused on Israel. That's why.
That's anti-Semitic by definition.
But that's why they're deemed unreliable.
Yeah,
with the information.
No, they also had gone to cut off certain 36 types of military equipment that they had cut out that they weren't supplying to us.
Right. Okay.
And I was strongly of the opinion that we should never buy another screw or a bolt from Great Britain for military purposes. If you can't rely on them in a war, forget about it.
Yeah.
We'll purchase them somewhere else. It wasn't a lot of money, but it's significant. The Canadians did the same thing. I think we should not buy another screwdriver from them. and be independent from them. But you can have a difference over a way a country's conducting a war, but we are in a war against people who want to destroy us.
Mm.
And if you start playing that game with us, then you're not reliable. But by definition, you're not reliable.
Yeah.
And we should find alternative sources of supply. There are other countries in the world that make the same things.
Mm. Well, on that sorry note, Ambassador Oren, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me, and I really appreciate it. It was a very enlightening conversation. I'm sure listeners loved it. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Winston Marshall Show with Michael Oren. Remember, head over to winstonmarshall.co.uk now for an extended conversation with Michael Oren, where he describes to me his time as the student of Bernard Lewis when he went up against Bernard Lewis, despite being friends, to argue against the neocon wars in Iraq, whereas Bernard Lewis argued in favor. As well as that, you'll get exclusive content and ad-free viewing. But until next time, be well.